Deep space. In space, no one can hear you scream. And in deep space, nobody can hear you scream also. But what if we could change that? That's what I'm going to do today, in this video that was sponsored by Saily. More on them a little bit later. So far in our space program, we've gone to Minmus, Mun, Duna, Ike and Elu, and those last few locations are starting to prove tricky, as we had a few moments of communications blackouts on those missions. So we're going to fix that today. With the completion of the Elu mission, we're going to take a quick break from unlocking science and focus on the construction of a deep space communications relay network. This is something I've actually never done before, so it'll be a fun old challenge. I deliberated building out a satellite network around Kerbin, Mun and Minmus, like I have on previous playthroughs of KSP, but I thought that it might be more useful to have a ring of ultra-powerful relays orbiting around the Sun in an orbit a little higher than Duna's, so that Kerbin can communicate with a satellite anywhere in the solar system, provided it's not occluded by whatever planet and moon it happens to be orbiting. We can address that problem at a later date though, with smaller supplementary satellites orbiting the major celestial bodies. Anyway, on screen, construction is going well. I'm building a mothership that will deploy 4 relay satellites evenly around the Sun, with the mothership itself equipped with a relay that can serve as the 5th and final relay in the network. I felt that 5 satellites was a good number, so that a spacecraft slash planet slash moon is never too far away from a relay satellite. There won't be too much of a gap between the satellites at the orbital height I'm going to send them to, which again will be an orbit a little higher than Duna's. I settled on 30 gigameters above the Sun, or 30 billion meters. You know, it just seemed like a nice round number, and I find myself visiting Duna and all the inner planets more frequently than the outer planets, and a network that surrounds the inner planets means that even on the far side of the inner planets and moons relative to Kerbin, a spacecraft should almost always still be able to talk to the Kerbal Space Center by pinging across the relay network, without us needing to install dedicated relays around each planet and each moon. One thing I should mention about the rocket, I had to use a 5-meter wide fairing base in order to accommodate the payload, but then using the 5-meter size parts made the rocket way overpowered for the actual mass of the payload, so I kind of made a 2.5 meter diameter rocket, but then surrounded it with 5-meter fairings to kind of give it a more proportional size, basically. But looking on screen, it looks like things are pretty much done, so I'm just going to dot the I's and cross the T's, and head on to the launch pad ready to go traveling. Traveling is an easy thing to do in video games, but traveling to other countries in real life can be a different story. Have you ever traveled to a new country only to instantly realize you have no internet, no maps, and no clue where you're going? Yeah, I've been there. That's why I started using Saily, your essential travel buddy, because a local SIM card can make such a difference when traveling, and Saily is a simple eSIM app, so no physical SIM required, that keeps you connected in over 200 destinations worldwide. Here is how it works. You download the Saily app and then you choose a data plan, regional, global, whatever fits your trip, and then you install the eSIM using the app's easy to follow instructions, ensuring that you're connected the very moment that you land. And yes, all of this also means no roaming fees. And you only need to install the Saily eSIM once. Just switch plans as you go. It even comes with built-in ad blocking and web protection to save not only data, but also keep your browsing safer. If your phone supports eSIMs, iOS or Android, then you're all set. But if your phone doesn't, then don't worry. Saily will refund your purchase, no problem. Saily have hooked up viewers of this channel with an extra special deal. Get an exclusive 15% off your Saily plan when you use my code MATTLOWNE at checkout. Download the Saily app or head to saily.com/MattLown, or of course scan the QR code to start traveling smarter and staying connected. Check the link in the description or that pinned comment. Thank you so much to Saily for sponsoring today's video. Our travels begin as we lift off from the launch pad, propelled by the 2 mainsail first stage engines. The first stage burn is actually kind of a long one, so you'll get to watch those lovely engine plumes, courtesy of the mod Waterfall, gradually expand as the air pressure gets lower and lower. Now, I should point out that we have a Kerbol Engineer window on screen near the top left there. This is mostly because setting up satellite networks requires some readings that aren't provided in stock KSP's UI. Well, it's not like the information is unobtainable, but we need to calculate it ourselves, and Kerbol Engineer just does the calculations in real time, so that's why we've got that window there. The most important value there is orbital period, which isn't something that's easily viewed in KSP without mods. Your orbital period is the amount of time it takes to complete one orbit. So a real-life example is the International Space Station's orbital period, which is approximately 90 minutes, meaning it completes one full orbit around Earth every 90 minutes, and allowing the onboard astronauts to experience around 16 sunrises and sunsets every day. Honestly, it must be so surreal. Space is so cool, man, isn't it? Anyway, we've basically kind of got through the bulk of our ascent there. We have ditched the first stage with those two aforementioned mainsail engines. Now we're burning our upper stage with our skipper engine. It's not going to get us all the way into circular orbit, but it's going to get us basically 99% of the way there, and then we can complete circularization, that was a hard word to say, using our spacecraft, which we are beginning now. The reason why I didn't want to achieve complete circularization using that lower stage is because I didn't want to leave any debris left in low Kerbin orbit, right? So if we stage it now, it's going to just burn up in the atmosphere and not leave any junk floating around in space, avoiding Kessler syndrome and all that stuff. So just watching our apoapsis height reading, and there we are. It is now above the border of space. We carried on burning a bit longer because obviously we still need to course through the atmosphere with a very unaerodynamic payload, so we are going to bleed off a bit of that speed and reduce our apoapsis height. But there we are. We have an apoapsis of basically 74 kilometers, and we ourselves are past the border of the atmosphere, so no more drag is being induced on the craft, so we can time warp and perform a very cheap circularization burn, less than 50 meters per second. It's just dawned on me that I kind of went through a big explanation about how we need to be able to see our orbital period using that Kerbol Engineer readout, and then didn't really explain why it's important. Basically, we want all 5 satellites to be equidistant around the sun, so we've got a nice evenly spread out network, and that means that we kind of want them all to have basically the same orbital period, because if one of them has a lower orbital period, then it will start catching up to the next satellite, if that makes sense, and everything just gets spread out, basically. So that's why it's important. So we don't actually really need the orbital period till the very end, because the first stage is going to be just placing the satellites in kind of roughly the right spot, and then at the very end we can just do fine-tune burns to get them all having roughly the same kind of orbital period. I then time warped 1,600 and something years into the future to test to make sure that they stayed in alignment, and they more or less did. One of them kind of shifted a little bit, but honestly, if this means that this lasts almost 2,000 years without needing to be replaced, I think once every 2,000 years I'm happy to just put a new satellite network up in place. So we're doing our escape burn from Kerbin in 2 phases, just because we're only powered by 1 nuclear engine, and it's kind of a fairly heavy payload for 1 nuclear engine to push, and you know, it's got a very low thrust to weight ratio, so I decided to split the escape burn up into 2 roughly equal sized burns. So the first one I think was just over 500 meters per second. This one is just below 800 meters per second. And yeah, it's going to put us on a trajectory that raises our apoapsis around the sun to be our desired orbital height. So I'm aiming for precisely, zoom in a little bit there so you guys can see a bit more easily, precisely 30 billion meters above the sun. So yeah, now we're getting really close. I'm just lowering the thrust limiter of the nuclear engine. You might have spotted in the build time lapse, but just in case you didn't, I've also added some very, very small RCS blocks to all the craft on this vehicle. Like, how much monopropellant do I have in total? The total monopropellant is 26.99 units spread across 5 vehicles. So they don't have very much monopropellant, but literally the RCS blocks are going to be set to about 1% thrust. That's the kind of precision burning that we're going to be doing for this mission. But I think pretty much we've established our orbital height there. We should make sure to deploy our solar panels so we don't run out of electric charge on the way. That would be a shame, wouldn't it? But yeah, I guess off we go to interplanetary space. So now that we have our apoapsis around the sun all set, begs the question, what should we raise our periapsis to? Because we want all 5 satellites to be equidistant from one another in a nice pentagram shape around the sun, which will also kind of draw a little star using the lines between the satellites. Yeah, that'll be nice, won't it? The way we will achieve this is we will put ourselves on a resonant orbit of our final 30 gigameter circular orbit. by resonant orbit or phase orbit, I mean an orbit where every time the mothership reaches apoapsis, the most recently deployed satellite has moved forward by 72 degrees, which is 1/5 of 360 degrees. To calculate this, we need to do maths, which I hate. So I did what any sensible person would do and headed to ChatGPT, and it got everything completely wrong. So then I decided to be smarter and calculate things myself. Just kidding, of course. I used a website called Resonant Orbit Calculator for Kerbal Space Program by Eric Meyer. It's a great, simple little website that lets you calculate phase orbits, or resonant orbits, required for a carrier spacecraft to deploy spacecraft to equidistant positions in a shared circular orbit, so perfect for setting up relay networks like this one. It also tells you the injection delta V value, which is how much delta V you'll need to move from the phase orbit into the final orbit, which we're kind of doing right now with our first deployed satellite. So for a 30 gigameter circular orbit around the Sun with a goal of having 5 equidistant satellites around it, we needed an apoapsis of 30 gigameters obviously, and a periapsis of precisely 21,634,112,654.6 meters, which is a very precise number. I'm not going to sweat too much about getting it exactly spot on, as you probably saw when I did the burn, but I tried to get as close as possible. And there we are, we just, like I said, deployed the first satellite. Now we're just going to get ourselves as close to a perfectly circular orbit as possible. Obviously, to do that, we'll need to kind of time warp to between apoapsis and periapsis to kind of modify our apogee and perigee accordingly, but obviously we can't do it completely because then the mothership, which I've now switched to, is going to reach its apoapsis and we're going to be needing to deploy our next satellite. So that's kind of it, right? I know I've kind of said throughout this playthrough that it's not really, you shouldn't use this as a tutorial, but I think this mission could be the one that breaks the trend, because I've never actually built an interplanetary deep space interplanetary orbital relay network like this. And I did kind of like a cursory search on YouTube to see if anyone else had done that, to see kind of what worked about the video, what didn't work about the video, and I couldn't really see many examples. So hey, I'm feeling like a little niche that's not really been filled too much before. So yeah, there we are. We've deployed our second satellite, and look at that. Lovely little separation between the first and second. I was getting quite happy that, yes, things had been calculated correctly. So now we can deploy our next one. One thing I didn't get quite right about the satellites is I put the decouplers on the wrong way round. So kind of when they detach from the mothership, the decoupler is still attached to the satellite. I thought I was being really careful to make sure the decouplers were definitely pointing the right way when I built the craft. Obviously, I messed up. Luckily, it didn't affect the engine performance. That would have been annoying to have to revert flight and change all those decouplers. So glad that it didn't make any. Glad it didn't have any detrimental effects to the performance of the satellites. Another issue I had, you might have noticed, is prograde and retrograde are flipped. I obviously put the probe core on upside down. The problem with the probe cores in KSP, a lot of them, most of them in fact, there isn't really an easy way to distinguish whether or not it's upside down or, the wrong way around essentially. The gold one, which I haven't unlocked yet in this playthrough, has a little text box on it, so that's kind of easy. Maybe this one that I've used does too, but it's really small. Who's got time to zoom in and see if you're placing it the right way around? And ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't really mind if prograde and retrograde are flipped, as long as I know that, they're aligned along the center of mass, and that burning prograde will be retrograde and retrograde will be prograde, and I'm going to hold some weird angle, basically. Anyway, it looks to me like the satellite network is basically complete. Look at that. We just have to do one more circularization, and that is with the mothership. Rather than having... I initially prototyped this as to be like 5 satellites that all deploy separately, and then we have to kind of crash the mothership onto somewhere like Duna or Eve or somewhere. And then I realized, wait, that's kind of dumb. Why don't we just put a relay on the mothership, and then the mothership serves as the final relay node? So that's what we're doing. Hey, look at that. We've got that lovely pentagram shape going around the Sun, and it forms a little star as well around the star. So that's nice. And they've all got a bright green connection to Kerbin, which is what we want. Basically, you can probably kind of figure it out just by looking at it, right? But to those that don't know, bright green means there's a very strong, good connection. Then kind of fainter green is not so good, and then red is even worse than that. And yeah, not really a big issue for the most part when it comes to communications,
But if you're doing things like broadcasting science experiments back to Kerbin, you don't get as much science reward as if you have a low signal strength. The science you get isn't as good as if you had compared to if you had a higher signal strength, and that's that's a sentence that I really struggled to say somehow. So as I mentioned earlier, what I decided to do now was time warp way into the future to make sure that these satellites will stay equidistant for a long period of time. So I made a quick save, obviously, because I'm not a psychopath, and we can revert to that quick save once we've done this little experiment. So this time didn't actually pass in real life. I've made the clock a bit bigger on screen so you can see it more easily, just how far into the future that we're time warping. And then we'll kind of pause it when I feel we're at a point where, okay, the separation now is not so great. You can see already one of the satellites is moving a bit too quickly. It's actually catching up with I think that's the mothership node that it's catching up to. So clearly we're going to need to go back and have a look at that particular satellite, because obviously its orbital period is too low. So again, you can see our orbital period here for this particular node is 3 years, 136 days, 2 hours, and yeah, that's it. I'm pausing it here because I felt like now this is kind of too unacceptable. So 1,366 years is the lifespan of the satellite network here. I did carry on time warping, so you can kind of see the results of that. That kind of, by the time we get into like 1,700 years, the satellites are too close together. So we're going to go back. I reloaded the quick save, so now we're not actually that far. We're only 12 years into the mission now. Yeah, it's kind of a long mission because of the distances these satellites are covering. So here we have switched to the offending spacecraft, and its orbital period is 3 years, 136 days, and 22 minutes, which is obviously too low. We need that orbital period to be longer. So I noticed our periapsis is actually 7 meters. I think, squinting at my screen there, 7 meters too low. So that's kind of the values we're dealing with here. So we'll try and get it a bit more circular, so a bit closer to a perfectly circular 30 gigameter high orbit, and hopefully that fixes things. So let's have a look at its orbital period once things are fixed. So again, just warping around, trying to match our periapsis and our apoapsis to be as close as physically possible. And then look at the orbital period. So forget about the days and years. The thing we care about is the 1 hour and 45 minutes. Or now it's 1 hour and 43 minutes. Nope, 1 hour and 44 minutes. Shouldn't try to commentate this sort of thing in real life, should I? So there you go, 1 hour. Is it going to change again? No, it looks like that. For an hour and... Or am I still doing corrective burns here? I'm going to zoom out my timer. No, I think we're pretty much done. So yeah, about an hour and 44 minutes is a kind of the orbital period that we now have. So we can switch to the other satellites, which stayed relatively equidistant for that massive nearly 2,000 year time warp. So we know that their orbital periods are roughly the same. So let's make sure that their orbital period is roughly 3 years, 136 days, 1 hour, 44 minutes. So yeah, let's go ahead and switch to one. Loading. Oh, there we are. 1 hour, 45 minutes. So as close. I think that 1 minute is going to, for the lifespan of this save file, I think this is going to be fine. So I actually just I went ahead and just renamed all the relays to be kind of 30 gigameter relay in case I do another satellite network later on. And yeah, I checked the orbital periods and they were all about 1 hour 44 or 1 hour 45. So there was only ever there's less than a minute basically between their orbital periods, which I was satisfied with. What I wasn't too satisfied with was the fact that we didn't unlock anything for this mission. And I felt like we can't just move straight to the next mission without having something unlocked. So because we didn't get any science, we can't, unlock any parts. But what we can unlock is another launch site. So I quickly speed built this jet here. There we are. And we're going ahead and unlock the easiest launch site to unlock. In case you don't know, there are multiple launch sites around Kerbin. I've done a full video showing you how to unlock all of them using aeroplanes. But the easiest one to unlock by far is the Cove launch site, because it's very, very close to the Kerbal Space Center. You can get there in a little aircraft like this. We'll just speed the push up a little bit and switch the Panthers to their afterburner mode to get there nice and fast for the Kerbals as well. Also, Valentina is on her first flight for this entire playthrough. So nice that she can finally get out of the house and go exploring with her friends. And yeah, just looming up ahead, I can just about see it in that little, cove. It's the Cove launch site. And it's probably the most useful out of all the unlockable Cove sites. It's probably the most useful out of all of the unlockable launch sites, because if you look really carefully in the water, you can see the launch pad. So launching like aquacraft, so boats, hovercrafts, floating platforms, whatever, really easy. You can just put them on that launch pad and just roll them down the very convenient ramp into the ocean. And it is great. It's a really, really useful launch site to have under our belt for Lowne Aerospace 3, the third one. So, although we didn't unlock any parts, we unlocked a new launch site. So, there we are. I don't know what the moral to the story is, but if your name is on the right hand side of the screen, then huge thank you. The names on the right are my patrons and my YouTube channel members, and they have access to the craft file in this video, and in that craft file's in-game description I put all the instructions, like the orbits you need and stuff like that. So if you want to go ahead and build a replica of this but don't want to build the craft or do the calculations, then sign up to be a member. Huge thank you again to Saley for sponsoring this video. Go check them out. It's a genuinely really useful app because I hate roaming fees. And yeah, that's the